Part 1. Welcome to a new video. In this story, our protagonist is Yang Kai, a young man with a big heart and great ambition who embarks on an exciting journey to the top of the martial world, where he must face adversity and survive difficult trials in the High Sky Pavilion. Do you find it interesting? Before starting, remember to hit the bell to receive all the updated content that we upload every day. Without further ado, let's begin. Our protagonist Yang Kai begins his day by sweeping the floor. He does it with such elegance that it seems like a magic show. Unfortunately, he is frustrated that the other disciples outperform him. Well, in the High Sky Pavilion, the competition between the disciples is ruthless. It is a law of the jungle where only the strongest survive. But there is an opportunity for the protagonist who, despite having started training 3 years ago, only reached the third stage of the tempered body and is known as the shame of the High Sky Pavilion. This means he gets no food, clothing, or shelter. But there is still hope. You just need to increase your skill level to get past this phase and become a true disciple of High Heaven Pavilion. Here, the disciples are like tigers, no one dares to face them, but only after passing the 3-year test. After that, they can choose a teacher or practice on their own, but if they can't break through the tempered body realm, they can be demoted to trial disciples. And it is precisely what has happened to our hero Yang Kai, who is a trial disciple and is known as the shame of High Heaven Pavilion. Being a trial disciple is hard to bear, because you have to be autonomous and take care of your own needs, including buying your own clothes and picking up your own food. The protagonist, despite the difficulties, has not given up and has sworn to fulfill his goal. After accepting a job as a small servant, he has gone through many difficulties, but he has not given up yet. Even as he sweeps, sweaty and exhausted, he thinks about his concept of toughness. If you don't hit a brick wall, you'll never understand what it means to be tough. But it seems that the protagonist has attracted the attention of a group of early disciples, who surround him as if he were an object of admiration. But in reality it is quite the opposite. There is a tense atmosphere of competition and rivalry between them. Everyone hopes to have the opportunity to challenge the protagonist and harvest something from him. However, the protagonist is used to being challenged and simply continues with his meditative routine, even as the crowd around him swells. He stops to meditate and regain his energy, but is surrounded by those who are stronger than him and mock him. Despite this, he remains silent and turns a deaf ear to provocations. The bells of the tower ring out and a new day begins. Yang Kai gets up and grabs his broom, as the disciples begin to yell and compete with each other to be chosen to challenge Yang Kai. Everyone wanted to be chosen as the protagonist's opponent, and the crowd was like a market full of vendors, all shouting and competing. But in the end, he tossed his broom into the air and pointed at a burly boy. Let's remember that the disciples in the pavilion are ranked according to their abilities, from ordinary disciples to core disciples who are the future hope of the place. Jo Jun is an ordinary disciple, while our protagonist Yang Kai is a trial disciple at the third stage of the tempered body realm. And so, they both introduced themselves and looked at each other, ready to put on a good show. In High Heaven Sect, there is a game where disciples can challenge each other once every 5 days to earn contribution points. These points can be exchanged for valuable items or money, but the most common way to earn them is by challenging other disciples. The protagonist then accepts the challenge and faces Jo Jun, who is stronger than him by 2 levels. Jo Jun seems to put up a very good fight at the beginning, beating the protagonist in several sentences. However, the protagonist fights tirelessly with his Shaolin fist abilities and manages to hold his own despite the differences in cultivation. Jo Jun tries to catch the protagonist, but he quickly reacts with a kick and executes the Shaolin punch. Then he executes a strong blow that knocks the protagonist down, and he believes that the end is over and that he has won. Rumors are heard in the surroundings that Jo Jun possibly does not know the protagonist, since he will continue to fight to the death and until the end. The lead then responds again and again with a flurry of attacks, and Jo Jun realizes that he is inferior in terms of experience and regrets challenging the lead, as he seems like a relentless maniac. After a series of defeats, people began to withdraw, but those who stayed were amazed at Yang Kai's tenacity. No matter how many times he was defeated, he just got up again. Jo Jun couldn't believe that his opponent was such a crazy person. After about 7 or 8 defeats, young Kai was swollen-faced, black-eyed, and swaying, but still, he kept fighting. Meanwhile, a disciple from the High Sky Pavilion's Dark Hall is in a tree and records the result of the duel in a notebook. They are responsible for recording all sect affairs, including the results of duels. This record is important, as it is the way disciples demonstrate their contribution points. The disciple, Xia Ningqian, records Yang Kai's 147th defeat in a small notebook. 147 consecutive losses. This is a unique record in the entire history of the sect. Xia Ningqian can't understand how the protagonist can endure all those defeats and not get discouraged. Could it be that he is crazy? But a young woman, after seeing him being beaten, decides to help him and disappears. When the protagonist wakes up, he is under the shade of a tree and with pain in his body. He discovers that he has been moved from his place of fainting and, checking his hand, finds a vial of blood-clotting cream, something very valuable in the sect. He realizes that someone left him this gift, which touches his heart and makes him very grateful. After a hard battle, he returns to his humble cabin to treat his wounds. He uses the fragrant blood-clotting cream to cure them, but stops by diluting it to make it last longer. After treating his injuries, he falls asleep in his bed, which only has a small blanket and a square black stone pillow he found a year ago, but still doesn't know what it is. In his sleep, he has a recurring dream about today's battle, where he is beaten and gets up persevering. He suddenly wakes up when a black bolt of lightning came from a stone and went through his head while he was sleeping. What a way to wake up! After calming down a bit, the protagonist sees that the stones seemed different and had lost weight. How is that possible? But that's nothing. When he picks it up, it turns into a book. Who'd say? But the book was empty, there was nothing written in it, so he looks at it and suddenly, the gold characters start appearing. The words that appeared were somewhat deep and mysterious. What secrets did this book hide? After a moment's reflection, he opened it again and this time read the first line. And it turns out that it was not a dream, but that the book had a great story behind it. The protagonist felt a strange presence and got a little scared, but after a moment of silence, he opened it again and this time lines of text began to appear. The book seemed to require blood to activate, so he pricked his finger and dripped a few drops of blood onto the page. After a while, it began to emit a black light, and a vortex appeared in the center of the page. The protagonist made a superhuman effort to stay conscious while he saw a bright and round object begin to appear. The protagonist has just discovered the famous golden body and is about to experience the most painful experience of his life. First, a golden skull flies out of the book and floats as if in meditation, lighting up the entire cabin. And what happens next? Just the skeleton burrowing into his chest without warning. This is where things get really intense. The skeleton starts pounding on his chest and bones, causing him excruciating pain. As if his bones are continually breaking and mending. That is what is happening to the protagonist. But our hero is brave. He does not renounce his conscience or surrender to the golden body, even if he is torturing him over and over again. Finally, he passes out. The protagonist woke up on the floor, thinking that everything that happened to him was a bad dream. But soon he discovered that his body had changed in a surprising way, his wounds had disappeared and his skin had renewed itself like a snake. In addition, I had more energy and vitality. He then asked if there was something else behind his change, perhaps an extraordinary power. Then he remembered the black book that he had used as a pillow and that could be related to everything that happened to him. But that is not all. The black book also had magical abilities, such as disappearing and appearing with just a thought. Of the protagonist, this made him excited to be with his discoveries, and he thought that perhaps he could be destined to be a hero, with a beautiful reward ahead. But that book could be made from a soul stone? A soul stone is a legendary gem that is formed when millions of spirits come together in the abyss, creating a monstrous amount of human vitality. It is said to require blood to function and could take up to 10,000 years to form. But if it is real, it is a supreme treasure. It can be combined with the body and open a door to another dimension. The protagonist is a test disciple with extensive knowledge, but when the black book is presented before him, doubts begin to appear. How could a soul stone be real if they are just legends and already extinct? But in front of him is the book, a foot long and 3 fingers high, with immeasurable value. If this news spread, the protagonist would be in great danger. While reading the mysterious book, he discovered information about a fist technique called Proud Golden Body. And what is even more impressive, the golden characters flew out of the book and directly into his brain. Apparently, it was the record of the tempered body, and he could learn new skills just by reading the book. So, eager to learn this technique, the protagonist waited until dawn to try it. With her mind open and her body relaxed, she began to move her hands and breathe deeply. He felt like a king of the underworld taking a mighty step into the horizon, embracing the vitality of the world as the wind whistled through the air. The protagonist continues to practice but suddenly feels a bit overwhelmed with all the pressure. You are experiencing pain and confusing sensations. But he is a young man with unwavering tenacity. Nothing can stop it. And you know what? It worked. After half an hour of diligently practicing, he managed to break through the barrier of the 3rd stage of the tempered body realm and enter the 4th. That's what I call an achievement in just 30 minutes. He is very excited to have reached the 4th stage in the tempered body realm. This is a great achievement for him, as he will have improved his physical abilities. It is a step towards true power as a cultivator, with the 7th and 9th stages developing one's own strength and finally the initial foundation realm. But there is an unpleasant side to all this. When cultivating, you have to cleanse your body of impurities, and while doing so, our hero vomited up a disgusting black liquid. However, after that, his sense is sharpened. He knows that there is a lot to do, as he has not yet managed to progress the tempered body realm fist technique. Despite everything, our hero is determined to move forward and is thinking about his future. Although he has a cumbersome job sweeping a 10th of the school, he is willing to do it while thinking about his future. Meanwhile, Xia Ningchan was watching the disciples and noticed the protagonist. Something different about him made her feel strange. On the other hand, the protagonist was thinking about the future after getting a great opportunity in his life. But when a disciple is accidentally hit, the protagonist apologized and asked after his well-being. It turns out that it was the 8th day of the month and the contribution hall was full of disciples collecting their points. The protagonist only received a few points each month, but still, he is saving up to one day get something valuable. Finally, after a busy morning sweeping, he went to the contribution hall, where he found the elderly treasurer dozing. Although he seems harmless, the protagonist knows that he is cunning. One day, the protagonist decided to wake up Treasurer Meng while he was snoring, but of course, the treasurer was not very happy about this. The protagonist asked him what's with that face, and the treasurer replied, "Why didn't you come in the morning?" To which the protagonist confidently replied, "There were a lot of people in the morning, now it's better." But then, Treasurer Meng scolded him and said, "You're interrupting my rest. Do you know what it means to disrespect the elders?" But what about the main character? Well, she once caught him looking at a female disciple, so now she can only lower her head before him to avoid a scandal. This is how they became friends. And what was their first conversation? Meng asked him the same as always, and the protagonist responded seriously. After counting his money, Meng whispered to him, "Kid, you want to save more and trade it for a tempered essence pill," to which the protagonist laughed, "I'll catch up eventually, right?" Treasurer Meng was speechless as the protagonist managed to obtain the precious tempering essence pill. He had thought that Yang Kai would never make it, but he was wrong. However, when the protagonist questions how the pill ended up with the old man proudly boasts that it is his and the other old men don't know. But when the protagonist offers to exchange enough contribution points for the pill, Meng reveals that he had been lying about his ownership of the pill. Before leaving, Meng realizes that the tempering essence pill is too valuable for him and asks him why he came to that place. Yang Kai explains that he has nowhere else to go. Meng tells him that he better leave High Sky Pavilion soon before he is killed. As the protagonist heads into town to buy food for the month, he notices that his body feels stronger and less tense than before. He believes this is due to the changes to his body caused by the golden skeleton. Finally, the protagonist arrives in the city and goes to his rice shop to buy his food. Then the protagonist arrives at a store in the Black Plum village. The store owner was busy counting his money on an abacus while his wife waited on the customers. When the protagonist came to his turn, the lady recognized him and asked him if he was there for rice. The protagonist said yes and asked for a bag, but the lady was not satisfied with his answer and asked him why he was so skinny if he said he was eating properly. He explained that he also went to the mountains to hunt, but the lady was not convinced. The lady went to get rice to give it to the main character. Her heart swelled because the owner and his wife always made excuses to give her more rice every time she came to buy. The boss of the rice shop is a kind and generous person who offered food to the protagonist, who lived alone. However, two suspicious guys came to the store and started causing trouble. They accused the chief of having sold poisoned rice and having a black heart. The boss was surprised and tried to explain that it must be a misunderstanding, but the two men did not want to listen to him. The protagonist, who knew the kindness of the boss, suspected that the two men only wanted to ruin his business. Finally, the protagonist decided to intervene and defend the boss against these false accusations. The boss denies any responsibility and the men reveal their true motivation: they want the boss to go bankrupt. But his speech sounds false and full of hypocrisy, and the boss and the protagonist begin to suspect his true intentions. In the middle of all this, an attractive young man appears who seems to be very interested in the situation. The protagonist recognizes the boy as part of a group of criminals and begins to realize that he is witnessing an evil plot. But this boy is not just any boy, he is a disciple of the High Sky Pavilion. The two men, who said they were poisoned, confront the young man and ask him what he wants, but he just laughs. And it is not easy to intimidate a disciple of the High Sky Pavilion. The young man tells the men that it seems that the poison they consumed is not that simple, and they reply that they are there to reveal a chief's black heart so that no one buys more in their store. But the boss worries, since he doesn't understand why these two are there. So the guy gently asks the boss if he offended anyone, but the boss says no. Could it be that your store is harming someone? But here comes the surprise: the disciple of the High Sky Pavilion accuses the brothers of lying, and everything gets interesting. The crowd begins to insult them and praise the young man. It turns out that it was all a performance to gain reputation. The men defend themselves and ask him who he is to mistrust them, and the young man arrogantly and gracefully replies, "My name is Sumu, I am a disciple of High Heaven Pavilion." That makes them tremble with fear. The men admit their lie and apologize to the young man, but he tells them that he cannot let them go. The protagonist is a guy with a clear mindset. It's important to be reasonable, but don't be fooled by evil. And that's exactly what he did. He encouraged the crowd to arrest the two cowards and help Chief he demand justice. Sumu, on the other hand, was in an awkward situation. Suddenly this brother appeared who had cornered him. He thought as he tried to escape. But the protagonist realized what he was doing and took extra precautions to make sure the boss wasn't fooled. The crowd could not just sit idly by and rallied to help capture the two men. The men were scared and huddled on the ground, begging not to be hit in the face, but they gave him a terrible beating. The sounds of blows are in the air and the merchants do not stop, showing an impressive fighting spirit. Even boss he joins in on the action and grabs two rags to join in on the beating. The strength of the numbers is impressive and Sumu tries to stop them, but the merchants continue to beat up the wrongdoers until the beating stops. The two men are badly injured on the ground, covered in blood and swollen. But the protagonist has no mercy and tells them that they deserve to die. He comes up with the idea of stabbing them. Sumu is worried that this punishment is excessive, but Sumu defends him by saying that every action has consequences. In the end, the boss tries to stop the situation, but the final decision is not up to them. At the protagonist's idea of killing the thieves, Sumu laughs and tries to pretend she isn't afraid. However, the other characters present don't see it that way and are pretty sure that Sumu is trembling on the inside. The protagonist then begins to encourage Sumu to do what he has to do, but is interrupted by the men lying on the ground, who accuse Sumu of being a traitor and a liar. After this, the protagonist discovers that Sumu knows the thieves. The men around him are not happy with him at all. They feel betrayed. After all, Sumu asked them for a favor to slander the boss and impress his daughter when Sumu introduced himself as the savior. And now they are being treated like pigs and are about to die for Sumu's crimes. What a way to repay a favor. The crowd discovered that Sumu had been lying and trying to hide her true intention. And it turns out that it was all to satisfy his sexual desires. The protagonist, who guessed the lie, had fun with the situation. The man tried to justify himself, but no one believed him and everyone laughed. The protagonist, who seems to be cunning, asked how much he promised Sumu and the man replied 50 silver. That's a fortune. Chief He, hearing about the whole matter, became extremely angry with Sumu, calling him vain, selfish, and a miserable person. The merchants also joined in their contempt. Sumu, knowing that her reputation was ruined, tried to calm down and asked the leading man what his name was. But this one answered with a wink and Sumu realized that he was an important disciple. Sumu, with a large intake of air, said, "You can try to hide your identity, but I will find out. After all, you are a test disciple in the school and there are only a few of them. You will be easy to find." After saying that, he turned around and left, pushing away anyone who tried to stop him. Everyone worried about the two brothers who had escaped during the chaos. But the protagonist, who had revealed the deception, was satisfied with the approval of the merchants and the boss. After the crowd dispersed, the boss's wife came out and approached the protagonist. Although he liked her more and more as he looked at her, Chief He was full of concern that the protagonist had offended Sumu and feared that he would cause trouble for him in the future. However, he smiled and said that he was not afraid. On the way back to his hut, the protagonist was worried that Sumu would attack him, but he didn't. He knew that if Sumu wanted to deal with him, then he would come for a duel with a scandal. He needed to concentrate more on practice in order to continue to stay in the sect. With this in mind, he hurried back to his cabin to train harder. And here is the first part of this story. Remember that if you liked it, I invite you to subscribe and like this video, as well as hit the bell to receive all the updated content that we upload every day. If you want the second part and see what the future of our adventurer Lin Huang will be, I invite you to leave it in the comments. Until our next video.